Welcome to the Safety Pro Podcast, powered by iReportSource, helping you manage safety one episode at a time. With the constant regulatory and workplace culture challenges businesses face, we'll provide you with all the relevant information necessary to achieve a safer, more productive workplace. No management theories, platitudes, or guru speak, just actionable info you can use right away. Now here's your host, the Safety Pro himself, Blaine Hoffman.
Welcome back to another episode of the Safety Pro Podcast. I have a special guest, Wes Carter from Amplify Your Process Safety. And not just Amplify Your Process Safety, you have a consulting business, a thriving business, right?
I do.
That's Amplify
Process Safety.
Yes. But you also have a podcast.
I have a podcast. Yes.
So tell us a little bit about, other than the obvious, tell us a little bit about the podcast.
The podcast. So I have a business partner, Rob Bartlett. I would be bad if I didn't introduce or at least mention my business partner, because he's 50% of the podcast.
He is, yes.
Yes, but we talk about process safety, our lessons learned, our experiences, and Blaine, I'm going off a little off here, but I respected what you were doing in your discipline as a podcast, and we couldn't find anything with that same kind of slant for process safety. Mm-hmm. And so I reached out to you, and so our podcast, I reached out to you, how do you've sustaining a pretty good audience. You're still going, what are some lessons learned? What can you teach us? Because we want to reach the same audience with process safety. And so our podcast, we talk about, we got kind of three core audiences, right? Boots on the ground, process safety pros, people who are like us, we feel like have a lot of good things to say in industry, or maybe they're looking to sharpen their skills. And then also people who are new to process safety. And so we have the podcast, and we're just very unscripted, lessons learned, tips we have, with those three audiences in mind. That's our podcast kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, you've nailed it. You've got the three types of people you talk to, and that's the first rule, right? Yeah, mm-hmm. Who are you talking to? Who's your audience?
Target audience. Your true north. Yes. Your true north.
Know your audience. That's right. And so the podcast, I've listened to it. It's fantastic. I've learned a lot about process safety management, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. And that's the topic. So we talk about on the Safety Pro podcast. Obviously, it's kind of all over the place, but it's all about safety. We talk to safety pros about all things 1910, 1926, get into a little bit of some niche things. We mention EPA every once in a while, but it's pretty much the standards that apply to the general industry, a manufacturing shop, are the exact same standards that you would have to comply with in a retail store, right? So what is this PSM, this little process safety management thing? How is that different from or set apart from general garden variety safety standards that all of us have to follow?
Yeah, so PSM, Process Safety Management, PSM standard, 1910-119. You can boil it down real simple. Keep it in the pipe. There are highly hazardous chemicals at many different industrial sites, whether that's in the chemical industry, oil and gas industry, paper mills. Mm-hmm. I mean, these different industries. And the highly hazardous chemicals, the hazard's always there. But as long as it stays in the pipe, everything's good. So process safety, PSM, EPA also has the RMP rule, mm-hmm. risk management plan rule. Either of those, it's about keeping it in the pipe. So there's a lot that goes with that. So it's what is my mechanical integrity program? I can have a hazardous chemical in a pipe, but if I'm not taking care of it, if I'm not doing inspections on the pipe, making sure that I'm operating it within its design parameters, that hazardous material can get outside of the pipe. There's a lot of different programs, a lot of different elements that go into managing your process safety and keeping those highly hazardous chemicals in the pipe. And that's PSM, process safety, in a nutshell.
Wow. So factories and chemicals have been around for quite a long time, right? And I know the Occupational Safety and Health Act was officially or formally passed in 1970. So PSM, was that before or at that time, or when did PSM become a thing?
Yeah, so 1992, and there
was
1992. 1992.
So it's not that old.
It's not that old. It's a baby.
What did we do before that?
Yeah, so there were a number of industrial incidents on a global scale. You might have heard of Flixborough, England in the 70s. Major explosion that killed, it seems like 28. Don't hold me accountable to this. 28 people. Bhopal, India.
But yeah,
huge disaster
big one.
in the 80s. That was the end of Union Carbide. You know, that company, large company.
Knew that company.
Yeah, and in 1989, the Phillips 66 refinery blew up in Pasadena, Texas.
Yep.
So that was 1989. That was the first major, you know, there's been numerous industrial incidents. This is the major one on U.S. soil, and that was finally the advent of the PSM standard in 1992.
Okay. So much like the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, you know, born out of a lot of loss and tragedy, so true is PSM, right?
Yes.
Okay. What about the standard has some similarities to general industry standards that my listeners would be able to at least start with and say, okay, I'm familiar with that?
Oh, yeah. So hot work. Safe work permits.
Hot work permits. Okay.
Yeah, you know, that's easy, hot work, but safe work permits. So it's hidden in a couple spots. One's obvious. There's an element in the PSM standard called hot work. But within operating procedures, they talk about the permit to work systems you have to have as part of your operating procedures. So whether that's confined space entry, hot work, you know, if you have a ground disturbance type, lockout, tag out, things like that, those are built into the PSM standard as well. So when you talk about direct overlap, that's an easy one. Emergency response.
Oh, good one.
It makes sense if you have these highly hazardous chemicals in large quantities on site that you have a emergency response plan. What if they get out? What if you have a toxic that has not only can it impact people on site, but if it got off site, it can impact, you know, a large community.
Yeah. So the question you asked, you said the first two words of the question is what if? So is that an approach a lot of folks take with some of these scenarios? Is a simple what if scenario?
Absolutely.
So what can you tell us about some of the other requirements regarding PSM standards? Are they proactive? Are they reactive? Are, you know,
both.
Do they try to, okay.
Both. And that's very similar, you know, and I don't mean to put you in a box, but if I were to, you know, I'd call you the occupational health and safety guy, and no offense if.
I feel trapped.
Yeah, but I put you in a box, right? But yeah, similar things, you know, I think there's a lot of proactive and reactive things in that space as well. You know, when you talk about near misses, kind of these leading indicators leading more to lagging indicators, you've already had the event. Right. And now you're trying to learn from it. Same thing. So like there's an element, PHA, a process hazard analysis. You have to do that on the front end. So if you construct a new facility that's going to have large volumes of these highly hazardous chemicals, you have to do a hazard assessment on the front end of that facility. The methodology, you know, that's up to the operating company, what methodology they use. But the thing is, this is our process. Have we analyzed the hazards, the potential deviations from, you know, normal operating conditions? You know, you can think of, like if I have a simple inlet separator on a vessel and that normally operates at, you know, a level, you know, in the middle of the vessel, what happens if that level carries over outside of its normal design intent? Is there a consequence that we're concerned with? Sometimes it's, no, that's operational only. You know, it's a headache. You know, we've got liquids downstream in our overheads. That's not how we designed it. But sometimes that could lead to a catastrophic event. Sometimes it could lead to maybe not catastrophic, but something that is not good and you want a safeguard in place. So it is on the front end, right? I call this leading, but it's more being proactive, right? You're making sure that you understand to the best of your ability with that team, what are the hazards of this process?
And this has to be documented.
Has to be documented.
So, and that's key, right? We don't see that in a lot of other areas of the standard outside of PSM, even if it's just recommended. This has to be documented. You have to show proof that it was documented.
You can get a government inspection. You know, EPA, OSHA can show up, and they'll say, I want to see your PHA for the process.
And so what you said at the beginning of you know, talking about PHA, that it's somewhat performance driven. We get to decide if it's a, you know, FEMA or, you know, some sort of tool that we want to use. But at the end result is we follow the methodology of a hazard analysis of a process.
Yeah, because
we have to have it documented.
Yeah, it's going to give you some gifts, right? You're going to come up with these. Either we've got the right safeguards in place, or we don't, and those are recommendations. So that's the whole idea. You've done a hazard assessment. What safeguards am I lacking, and what are those gaps? And then make sure you put them in place. Right? You have to document your recommendations, track them to closure. Similar, you know, kind of transitions into incident investigation.
Right.
Incident investigation can be someone broke their leg.
Yeah.
Someone smashed, you know, a finger. And
so now we're on the flip side. We're on the lagging side.
Yeah, right? Learning, right?
So if we document in an incident investigation, shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? But then we don't do those things, and that comes up. That's discovered later in an audit or some investigation, and we didn't act on those. That's just as bad. We know that in general industry. So what you're saying is in the PHA, for the process safety management standard, we have to document that we've done a hazard analysis of a process, and if we determine that we didn't have something in place, or we needed something in place in case this hypothetical thing happened, and we don't have it, that's a risk.
Oh, for sure.
That's good. I think in general industry, we could take that. We should be taking that approach as a best practice, right? Even though the standard may not call for it specifically in some cases. I mean, we should all be doing that. We should all be looking at, any task or job, whether it's a JSA or something. We should be producing these things.
And it's a thing about a JSA. I was involved, I guess a little bit earlier in my career. I dabbled a little bit of occupational health and safety, and that was something I was trying to standardize a few things. Not a canned JSA. But there were certain tasks that we were doing on a routine basis, and that we realized we could put certain safeguards in place just by default. You still have to do a JSA because you never know maybe there's construction in the area, the weather's changed. You know what I mean? Maybe the crew you're working with isn't your normal crew. Hazards of that specific job, but there were continual safeguards that we need to put in place for routine tasks, right? So it's very similar to that.
You mentioned earlier in your career, I know you specialize in process safety management. You and Rob.
Yes.
How many on your team?
There are 4 of us now.
4. I did see recently an announcement that you added.
Shout out to Steve.
Steve. All right. Steve, if you're listening, shout out. So you specialize in process safety. What is your background?
So I studied chemical engineering in school.
I got chemical engineering.
Yes. And I got while I was in school, because of what happened in 1989.
Okay.
It just is what it is, a casualty of what happened. Someone died in that refinery explosion, and the spouse took proceeds from, I guess, the settlement, and gave money to my school where I went when I got my undergraduate degree to form the Mary Kay O'Connor Process Safety Center. So it actually is housed in the KME department while I was getting my undergrad. Just to be honest, I saw it as a resume buffer.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'll take some extra coursework in this. I fell in love with it.
Process safety, chemical engineering. Same with Rob?
Yes, Rob is KME.
Okay.
Rob's from the Northeast. I'm from Texas. And then Rob is he actually lives in Maine.
Maine.
I'm not going to tell you his address, but
we'll edit that out.
Yeah. But yes, Rob's KME as well.
Okay, good.
So the only differences between us when you talk about my background is I'm predominantly oil and gas. When I say overwhelming majority. So I spent about 18 months in a global type role within the chemical industry. But outside of that, all of my career has been in oil and gas, specifically midstream gas processing.
Okay.
Rob has focused his entire career in the chemical industry. Right. Okay. So
all over the place, different companies.
Yep.
As a consultant or both in-house?
Both. Out of school, he went to go work for a major, I'll say a global chemical company.
Nice.
And then he's been a consultant for, Rob, forgive me, but I think about 8 years now, 8-9 years.
He said 8, Rob. I'm going to hold him to it.
Yeah.
So a lot of experience collectively for all of you.
Yeah. I worked so I was hired for, I'll call it a super major out of school. And I worked for them for 5 years. Then I left the super major and I went to a smaller company, 400 employees. We operated only across 4 states. I left them and I went to even smaller privately held firm that had 100 employees before I jumped into, I'll call it a global company again with 20,000 employees. And, my role or my team supported 160 facilities across the globe. So it's kind of seeing how things are done in big companies, how things are done in small companies, when you've got a number of resources, when you have no resources, when you don't have backing, type things like that. And I think Rob's had similar experiences, not only as an employee, but also as a consultant. And that was the thing about when we got together at the podcast is how do we share these things that we feel like, we've had failures. We've had things that we thought were going to work well and they didn't work well. Right. And so that's a little bit about our background.
So let's transition a little bit, because with all that background, several things come to mind, as a former consultant, recovering consultant is what I like to call myself.
That's good.
It's tough. You know how it is.
Yeah.
It's a lot of learning and listening and discovering with clients, make recommendations. Sometimes they take them, sometimes they don't. But, I was lucky in that early on in my career, I made a choice to pivot, I guess you could say. So I went away from just doing training and doing like safety program reviews for companies. Companies would call after they get an audit and they would just have to do something. So they would just call, and I knew you wouldn't get another call back from those folks. So I shifted to looking at the voluntary protection program, the partnership with OSHA. And that got me into almost a 10-year run of only dealing with companies that were actively seeking to partner with OSHA. So they were high-performing, high-functioning companies. So I knew they had resources to throw at improving safety culture and work practices and processes. So that was kind of cheating as a consultant, but
they're good partners. They have buy-in.
Yes, absolutely. So that nailed that first part. And so for me, it was important to find the right organizations that were learning from their past. They don't want to repeat the same mistakes twice. And so how do you see organizations, maybe they hadn't experienced it themselves, but when you mentioned some of these catastrophes, these tragedies that have occurred, do you find organizations or in that sector, they learn from the mistakes of others, that they take that seriously, or are you finding that it can still be a challenge?
It can definitely still be a challenge.
Okay.
I can answer that one pretty quick.
There you go.
I
can move on to the next question.
No, I mean, it's still a challenge. And it's just because, fortunately, these high consequence events, releases of your highly hazardous chemicals that lead to some kind of consequence, whether it's a vapor cloud explosion, a toxic exposure, they're far and in between, right there.
So they're rare.
They're rare. And that's the thing. It's until you experience one, or something happens in your backyard, something happens maybe within 100 miles or within your state. And a good example of this is what just happened in Philadelphia. This is about 8 weeks ago. Major refinery blew up.
Right. Yes.
So that
I almost forgot about that one.
Yeah, because that one, CSB, the Chemical Safety Board, was deployed to do an investigation. But what's really unique about that is, I'm sure you saw videos, people on Twitter and all this. It was, East Coast.
It was all over the place there.
No one was injured. No one was killed.
Wow.
That's amazing. Right. But so what I'm getting at is these events, it's sometimes like you're playing the game of you're preparing for the worst case event that more than likely will not come. But if it does, that can be devastating. Right. So it's hard sometimes. Sometimes people get it. They've been around an explosion. They've seen a fire. They know that event is unlikely, but if it can be devastating. Right. Someone told me once, this spectrum of concerns was a good topic. Someone told me about, I don't know, we might address in a little bit.
Yeah.
But spectrum of concerns to me was always something that really got my mind correct whenever I stepped into a facility.
So what is that? Explain that a little bit.
So there was this gentleman that was, we called him a coach. He used to travel when I was with I worked for my employer out of school. He's a coach, went around the world. We had 85,000 employees. Like I said, super major oil and gas company. And all he did was just coaching, and he would step in. And he called this, I remember we went out to a site. He was looking at housekeeping, and he was looking at general things. And then he shifted focus into process safety. It was like interchangeable. This guy was talking about not only you taking care of yourself, but then he was also talking about the process, and he was going back and forth. We spent the whole day in the plant, came back in, sat down, went on a whiteboard, and he just started drawing. And I remember I still have the notes. I have this book that it's just a risk-based process safety book from CCPS, the Center for Chemical Process Safety.
Yeah.
I still remember I flipped that book open right now, and I've got all his notes right there sketched on the inside.
On the inside cover?
Yep.
Wow.
Of all his notes. But spectrum of concerns. It was about when you step into a facility, how are you looking out for you? How are you looking out for the people who are on your team, whether it's operators? If I'm an engineer and I'm in a plant, that doesn't mean just I'm an engineer. That's all I care about. You need to care about the people around you. So it's on you. So you often hear behavior-based safety, right? That's always a thing. Like, I'm going to do a safety observation conversation or something like that. And he was like, that's all great, whatever you term it. He goes, you should be looking out for the people around you, and you should be looking out for yourself. And he always shifted that back to, so you can go home, right, the same way you showed up. If you got loved ones, if you like to, maybe you're single and you like to play guitar all night, you're not going to play guitar all night, right? If you get injured, whatever.
Right.
So he talked about that, but then he said your spectrum of concerns is, so occupational health and safety is about you and your team, the people around you. But if you inappropriately focus only on that, you're missing a bigger picture. Because even though it's a more rare event, if you turn a valve wrong, or you have a really poor operating discipline, or you let other things slip, those can lead to not only killing 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people, you can lose your job, like the company. The company can go away.
You could negatively impact an entire community. So I learned this in, oddly enough, I made this connection from a marketing training I was going through. My wife and I owned a franchise stores, a couple of franchise stores a couple of years back. Some of the marketing training you go through, they tell you to think about, it was the power of 4. It was 4 walls, 4 blocks, and 4 miles.
Okay.
I talk about your marketing.
Yeah.
Right. talk about your reach, your the impact of your business.
Okay.
So I immediately, because I'm a dork, I immediately started thinking, hey, that's perfect for analogy for thinking about safety.
Oh man, I mean, yeah, absolutely.
You've got your immediate area where you work, your department, or your 4 walls, right? You've got your 4 blocks, your immediate vicinity, your property, and everything surrounding that, and then your 4 miles of community at large. So yeah, the spectrum, if you will. That's great. I'm going to have to steal that spectrum of, what was it? Spectrum of concerns.
Your spectrum of concerns. Like I said, it's a nice. It's just 3 words, but it's real. When I step into some, always like spectrum of concerns. Yeah. Am I taking care of me? Am I looking out for the people around me who may be doing things in a good way, or they may have some unsafe acts, maybe some unsafe conditions, whatever, that part. And then am I also paying attention to the process, right? Spectrum of concerns.
So we wanted to talk about process safety management in a way that introduced my listeners to what PSM is.
Yeah.
Some similarities and overlaps to general industry standards, which most of us should be familiar with. So, Wes, bring it all home. Kind of nutshell this for me. How would you wrap up this episode? What do you want safety pros that I talk to every day, not just every day in our work, but on the podcast? What would you want them to know, the most important aspects of PSM, or take away in general from this episode?
I think the process safety is good operating. If you do process safety poorly, you can jeopardize all the good things you do in the occupational health and safety world. Mm-hmm. What good is it if you make sure you've done a PPE hazard assessment, you're wearing FRCs, you got a hard hat, you fill out your JSA, you understand the hazards of your job, but you send them up to a ticking time bomb.
Right.
So when you think about in that world where you can influence the overlap, because like hot work, that's a simple one when it comes to overlap. Mm-hmm. Hot work is just, I'm walking in the middle of my facility and I'm doing welding. Mm-hmm. I'm standing in the middle of my plant with an open flame, right? A torch. So you go through, you want to take care of the people in the immediate area, right? There's a fire or something like that, but you also want to what if I have a major release of hydrocarbons and they flammable and they ignite? Mm-hmm. So I think if you're in this space, your audience, that listens more about process safety, it really is good operating. It's keeping the hazardous chemical in the pipe. And if you're doing that, you're more than half the battle about keeping your people safe. You have a release of flammable material. Hydrocarbons don't know, like, hey, stop right here.
Right.
They don't, it's a flammable gas cloud, mm-hmm. And it can go anywhere in your site. And mm-hmm. so it's just, if you really want to put it, take it home about your audience, it's keep your hydrocarbons in the pipe, keep your hazardous materials in the pipe. And there's a lot that goes with that. Mm-hmm. So it not only takes care of the process, but also takes care of your people, your spectrum of concerns.
Yeah. And, we can apply that outside of PSM and just work in general. Good operations, mm-hmm. And we talk a lot about just, being safe and having to define what safe is sometimes. Don't get hurt or be safe is a general statement. Sometimes we have to define what that is. And it sounds like what we can learn from PSM is sometimes defining that is establishing safe operating procedures, mm-hmm. and also defining what's not ordinary, right? What's out of the ordinary, unacceptable, and being able to respond to that when that occurs. So where can my listeners learn more about process safety management? Because I'm sending folks to your podcast and your website because you're the PSM folks. That's your niche and you've nailed it. So where can they learn more?
Sure. You can, easy one's OSHA.gov, right? You can read the regulation. I'm not going to act like that's very exciting at times.
No, it isn't, but we need to.
Yes. There's also a couple of papers. I think it's OSHA 3122 and like 3133 or something like that. 4 numbers. They start with a 3-1. I can tell you that. But they're really short papers on actual implementation of it, and they're written by OSHA. Center for Chemical Process Safety, CCPS. They formed that organization in 1985 because of Flicksboro and Bhopal. Mm-hmm. So they formed in 1985. They have 20 elements. OSHA took the 14 of their 20 elements to create the PSM standard. So they're like the godfathers.
So sort of like consensus standards.
Yes. Okay. And they put out great books to read. I have tons of CCPS books. I have my professional certification through CCPS.
That's right. Okay.
And it's CCPS is kind of a subsidiary of the American Institute of Chemical Engineers.
Okay.
Right. So they have a global congress of process safety. If any of your listeners like to attend things, they have them all over. Sometimes they're in fun spots like New Orleans.
There you go.
All over the place, but lots of information there.
We failed to mention that.
We are in New Orleans.
We are in New Orleans. We are face to face. and I'm at the VPPPA National Safety Symposium, and Wes flew from Texas,
yes,
from which you hail, all the way over to New Orleans. It wasn't that far, was it?
It was an hour and 20-minute flight.
Yeah. It was brutal. It was grueling, but you made it. You
Yes, sir.
came here in person. The first interview that I've done on the podcast.
I'm the first?
You are the very first.
Oh, you better, Drew, write this down.
Drew here. Drew Stone from iReportSource is with us as well. He's over here. He's writing notes like a madman. So, yes, the very first interview. I have aired interviews that I have done on other podcasts.
Okay.
But that's like cheating. That was a free episode. That's what I did. I said, hey, I don't have to record this week. I already did an interview for somebody else's podcast, so I'll just use it as one of mine. But you're the first one. You flew out here to meet with us to talk about an important topic. And I want to make sure people can find you and Rob and the rest of your team. Where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find us on Amplify Your Process Safety. That's the podcast. iTunes, is it Google Play?
All the Stitcher. There's too many of them.
Joe, I'm sorry that I don't know all of them. I think she has us like on 8 or 9.
You're on quite a few.
But she went all out trying to just make sure that if people listened, they heard us, they heard about us, they wanted to find us. She wanted to make sure it
Joe is she's your producer,
she's our producer
of the podcast,
yes.
But she's also a member of your team.
Absolutely.
And then where can they find information? Let's say they listen to your podcast, they find your podcast, and it's great information. They're getting a lot of value. I mean, the banter between you and Rob it just cracks me up. So I like that. That's why I listen for not just the information, but it's kind of funny.
I don't know if Rob likes it, but
Are you needling him a lot?
Is that
yeah. Okay?
No.
Still, it's fun.
Yeah.
We won't tell Rob.
Yeah.
But the information they find there can be valuable. What if they want to reach out and learn more? Maybe they're at a PSM site, or they're working for a PSM, at a PSM facility, or they want to. And they want to reach out and learn more about what you guys offer on the consulting side.
From the business side. Yeah. So Amplify Process Safety is our company. Mm-hmm. We have a website, amplifyconsultants.com.
Okay.
Yeah. I wish we could have gotten amplify.com, but it's kind of a popular name.
It was taken?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have amplifyconsultants.com.
That works.
Yeah.
Because it's a little more specific, actually.
Yeah. So you can reach us there. We've got a contact page. You just fill out your information, get a hold of us.
All right. I will have links in the show notes as well to the website as well as the podcast. So we will make sure that goes out. And look, I guess we could talk for a long time about PSM. I learned a lot about those tragedies and a few others when I had to take a legal course in safety law.
Yeah.
And it's crazy stuff that still happens around the world. I not to go down this path. We're lucky in this country in some regards in that, we have the ability to petition our government, and mm-hmm. we can actually help create and shape some of these regulations. I still scratch my head when I hear some companies, they'll complain about some of these, and I'm like, you can participate. you can actually take an active part in how we shape these regulations. If their objections to some aspects of them are valid, they can participate. So I've learned a lot about those in my past. Do you see that the future is getting better? It's brighter around, not just in our country, but around the world when it comes to things like this in your world, PSM?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we actually I've had a number of clients, or not clients, we'll call them leads, but people have, nothing's come of it, but people have reached out from India, believe it or not. They're going through, I don't know much about the industrial setup in India, mm-hmm. but I've gathered 2 things. One is they're losing a lot of their horsepower with experience. People are retiring. They're becoming of retirement age.
Yeah.
And there is a large gap between that retirement age professional and the people who are coming to backfill. The second is they don't do process safety well.
Wow.
They have studies done that are awful. I've had someone directly tell me, they're like, hey, I looked at a facility siting study they did. A facility siting study is a kind of technical thing you do. Look at the worst case scenarios. If it happened, what would happen to my occupied buildings? Can they take this type of blast? Mm-hmm. If it's a toxic release, can I shut off the intake? Does it detect that chemical's been released mm-hmm. and actually stop bringing that toxic air into the place where I've told people to shelter?
Right.
That type deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's things that get done just because it's not that they don't, I want to make something real clear. It's not that they don't have the best intent, the people they hired to do these studies. It's that the people who do these studies, They just don't have the experience. They don't have, they haven't done a study and had someone come in behind them and say, hey, the approach you just took, these are some poor assumptions. They don't have that kind of, you call that depth, that knowledge built in locally. Sure. They don't have this internal, like within. So I see that. I don't see it as being I hope that on a global scale, it's like I learned a lot when I went into the chemical world and I was in this global world that, from the Netherlands organization, TNO, they put out great material, right? And so when I was in this global role, I learned a lot about, it's just another, you got to think, the Netherlands has been doing business for a while. Mm-hmm. Anyone in Europe's been doing business for a while.
Yeah, they've been around a good long time.
Chances are they've got some lessons learned and there's good information. So I think on a global level, when you talk about that, I think there are, I'll call it developing nations that are getting more industrialized, are now learning that, yeah, we can duplicate this type of technology, but do we have the same, restrictions, regulations that go along with that to make sure we keep the hazard safe? You think, so India, I've had, two leads in the last 8 months.
Which is ironic. Bhopal was in India.
American company.
An American company. And the impact was thousands of people. Well, initially thousands, but then just
long term.
Over the lifetime of some of those several generations, right? Didn't you tell me there was a hospital built just for that event?
There was long-term effects. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's unbelievable when you release that much toxics. Mm-hmm. They had I don't want to call it shanties, but these, I think that's the right word, right? These little like temporary housing shelters built up outside the facility, and they weren't there when the facility was built, but over time they built up, and that's where that toxic material is released.
Wow.
So people in absolute poverty.
Is that hospital still there?
I don't know.
That's crazy. So that's good that, I think that we can lead the global industry from the U.S. We have smart people. We have organizations like yours. I think that we definitely need to align more with some international standards. I know ISO 45001 is a big thing for general workplace safety. Do you see an international standard for more alignment with an international standard? I know you mentioned the CCPS,
Center for Chemical Process Safety. You got it right.
I'm trying to remember.
You learned well.
All right. So you see,
I think they do a lot on a global scale already.
Okay.
I do. Good. They call it the Global Congress for Process Safety when they get together.
Okay.
So they actually do one in convention in Europe. They do them in Asia. And it amazes me when I show up. I was in San Antonio 2 years ago for this convention, and there were people from all over the world.
That's great.
And so
that's good.
I don't want to sell India short. Like they don't. They know their business, and I think. But there was someone right now is a grad student at my alma mater, and I met him, and he's getting his master's in process safety. Mm-hmm. Just trying to build my network, keep up with him. He reached out to me when he was looking for a position. I didn't have anything, but I'm a big fan of building my network. Yeah. And so I took him to dinner this summer when he was doing an internship, and he's from India. And so this is where I got this kind of in-depth perspective, kind of like,
nice.
I didn't just like go to a website and read something. It was a genuine conversation, right? And these are the things he brought up to me.
I remember one of my past employers, we had a facility in India, and we ran it based on our standards. Mm-hmm. I mean, we had some local standards that you had to follow, but from my recollection, they weren't near as stringent as our self-imposed standards. The same with China. Multiple plants in China, doing some work with some other clients, and their whole approach was the same. It was, no, we will run that plant as if it were in Indiana.
Yeah.
And that was good because they recognized the slippery slope. Is that a phrase? I can use that phrase, I guess. If they were to park that plant over there and then go, oh, we can dump whatever, wherever. Okay. They were like, no, that's not a good habit to get into, one, organizationally. That's not good for the environment. We know historically where that has led. So I see a lot of American companies that operate abroad have learned from those past mistakes and say, we're not going to go there just because they have lax safety and environmental regulations. There are other reasons why it makes business sense to operate over there. Yeah. We're still going to operate, responsibly.
We're still going to be good stewards of our business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think more American companies are doing that.
It'd be nice if you could get all governments to hold hands,
right,
and agree to, we're going to hold everyone accountable. But like you said, you have to it has to be a good steward of business, an operating company with a good mindset to go in there and say, even if the local government hasn't learned, or they don't have the horsepower yet to learn, or they haven't enforced these, no, we know better. And this is how we're going to operate. We're going to protect our people with certain things, and we're going to make sure we protect the communities where we operate.
That's good. Wes, I can't thank you enough for joining me on the podcast. History right here. First interview.
I know. I didn't know this.
It's the very first one.
I'm excited.
And in person, not over the phone. We didn't Skype this like some low rent podcast.
No, it's always better.
Totally a
face to face is awesome.
Yes, it is awesome. Are we gonna go to dinner? We're gonna talk some more.
We're going to dinner.
We're not gonna record it though. We're gonna cheat the audience.
Maybe
this is just for us.
Yeah, dinner's off the record.
I might share notes online, but that's about it.
Yeah.
So, all right, Wes. Thanks again, and hey, stay tuned. As I mentioned earlier, I am here in New Orleans. I am with Drew Stone from iReportSource, doing some business development, right? Drew, he's not on mic, but he's sitting right here.
You got it.
Yes,
nodding his head.
He's loud. So we're here because I don't mention this enough. The podcast, the Safety Pro podcast, is powered by iReportSource. So we are going to make friends and meet new people here at the VPPPA National Symposium. I'm going to interview some board members from VPPPA. So stay tuned for those episodes coming out this week. And until the next Safety Pro podcast episode, as always, be safe.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Safety Pro Podcast, powered by iReportSource, the all-in-one digital safety solution. For info on how you can request a free demo on all the capabilities of iReportSource to streamline your business's safety management system, head over to thesafetypropodcast.com. We look forward to helping you manage safety on the next episode of the Safety Pro Podcast.